We have complicated ownership and management structure in the uplands, and the result is that some areas are managed by multiple people as commonage, even though there's various types of ownership, and other areas are managed by one individual. So how do we get farmers to agree to do anything on those commonages? In the past, all agri-environmental schemes have been dealing with those farmers as individuals, not as a group, and I suppose the net result is, despite years of schemes and a lot of money, the habitats have continued to deteriorate. So our first objective was to get the commonage farmers to come together, that when we sit down with them we can agree one plan for the whole area, and they as a group then are responsible for delivering that plan, because I suppose dealing with them as individuals hadn't worked, so it was time to try something different.
Well, I suppose, yeah, we were all saying, wonder what's this going to come to, like, you know, or everyone was thinking, what's it going to make any difference at all, like, or is it only a matter of ticking the boxes, like, you know?
I suppose when I first started talking here about this idea of farmers all working together as a group and agreeing stuff, like, you get some odd looks and people say, well, that won't work, you know, and there's lads don't get on together and all the rest. So we decided that we wanted some formal structure for it. So it wasn't just a case of everybody come down some night and we all sign a form and suddenly we're a group and we go ahead, and first time there's a problem then it falls apart. Our operation group within the SUAS, we discussed it and we decided that we would bring in an external facilitator, somebody with some experience in this. So then that facilitator and myself as project manager, we sat down and we drew up a kind of a programme that the farmers would have to come through a certain number of workshops and meetings, so that kind of taught them or gave them the structure that if they have problems, how do they make decisions and how do they move forward?
No, it was a good idea actually. It was a good idea, yeah. And like, you know, especially on our hill, like we have 10 on it, like, you know. It's one of the bigger communities like that has people on it, you know, so it was a good idea.
While they may have been farming the same piece of land for years and years and their families, they may have never actually sat down kind of as a unit just to talk about the hill and, hey, you know this is important and we're all working on this together. And like with traditional schemes, you know, farmers would have been treated as individuals, whereas with SUAS we were treating a commonage area as a unit. By working as a group, by carrying out the actions together and by taking, I suppose, ownership of the project as well, and payments and how payments were going to be divided out, and grazing management plans, and, you know, if somebody may have not had the maximum number of sheep that are there, someone else might have had slightly more, so it worked out and balanced, you know, and it worked for everybody.
Obviously there has to be, for any group to work, there has to be some incentive, there has to be an objective or an end goal, and the incentive we were giving these farmers was, look, we're going to we're going to help you to manage your hills, and there will be a financial reward if the hills are in better condition.
The difference with SUAS was that it was a results based. It was payments for doing works. Other schemes were always very broad brush schemes, you know, just X amount of money for if you had X amount of hectares, but the work wasn't always getting done. That was the trouble we had.
Now, one of the really innovative things we looked at with the commonages was, if we're paying for the quality that's delivered on the hills, how do we reward the people who are delivering that, not the people who are sitting at home doing nothing? So what we did was we went out and we asked the farmers themselves, and we just threw out to them, look, we calculated a payment based on the whole area of the commonage, and this amount of money, how should that be divided up among the two? And each site had a discussion among themselves as to what was appropriate for them. They all came up with different answers. Some came up with the same answers for very, very different reasons.
You know, if you have somebody that's not active, well, it's very necessary to have their blessing to go ahead, or to say, right, well, sure, I'm not going to use it, but I'll let everyone else go ahead, and, you know, and then the group works out among themselves, you know, what way payments is going to work.
We had great buy-in and support from the farmers, and like, they did come with us and they trusted us on it. They were taking a bit of a leap of faith, because some of the things we were asking them to do, it was not the actions that they're normally associated with uplands. But I think that it does show there is an appetite out there among farmers to do things slightly different. We were guaranteeing it for 5 years, but the other thing we said is that at the end of the 5 years, your hill or your commonage will be in much better condition than it was starting. And I think on all of our hills we have demonstrated that we have done work and we have improved the habitat conditions there.
everybody. Delighted to see such a good crowd here today. One of the things I'd say about the SUAS project is it has never been just about the farmers who are in the scheme. It has always been about learning for the greater good in the upland areas, and our focus was always about figuring out how we can use what we learned for other areas in the future. So today's conference, when we start saying we'd have it, it wasn't designed that we come here today and we stand up and that we give ourselves a clap on the back and say ain't we great for delivering SUAS. No, it was actually about what we've learned, where do we take it from here, and that's why we brought in a few guest speakers to push on the conversation. So what we've learned, what's the opportunities going forward. So on that note, when I was thinking originally about putting together my presentation for today, I was thinking about all the innovative things that we have done in SUAS, about using GPS collars and all this. But when I sat down to put it together, one of the most innovative things that we done, one of the most important things we done was to get an ecologist to come in and to go out and walk the hills. Just tell us what was up there. Because to date, regardless of whether it's an SAC or national park, nobody has ever gone out there to accurately look at the quality of the habitats up there, see what they're like. So that was the first thing we did. Actually, I have to say, I'm from an agricultural background, Chagos advisor. I learned a huge amount travelling around with Faith, walking those hills and looking at it. So it wasn't just farmers learning, it was also me. And I think it's kind of a knowledge that you can't just bring people into a room someday, sit down and put up slides and start talking about all this. It's something that you have to experience over time. You have to get an appreciation and understanding about these habitats and how they work. So it's something that needs to be developed over time, and probably it's an issue for our advisors and whoever else is going to be involved in these schemes, that you can't just bring them in and train them overnight. So the first thing we did was brought Faith in, and we asked her to come up with a wish list. I said, look, there's no guarantee we're going to do all this, but what would she like to see happening? So Faith wasn't going up there to mind sheep, I wasn't going up there to mind sheep, so look, we had to involve the farmers. And as I said in one of the videos earlier, this was the first time anyone went to talk to the farmers, to explain out to them what was important up there, why it was good, or what they should actually do about it. Because so we walked the hills and we had great conversations and that, but there, after a couple of years, we discovered we didn't do quite as well as we thought. Because sometimes there was a bit of a misunderstanding that what we thought we were saying to the farmers, they were hearing slightly different, because there was a difference in the language and the terms we were using, that type of thing. And also, when we went out to walk the hills, it was very much determined by what we saw on the day. So if we walked out into an area of tall heather, obviously we talked about tall heather. If we went into an area of erosion, we talked about that. But if we didn't see it on the day, we didn't actually talk about it. So what we did then, we took in a new tranche of farmers there before Christmas, and what we did is we organised a training event for them. So brought them all into the Rocket Centre in Lara for a day. There was a couple of presentations, we threw an awful lot of information at them on that, and 2 weeks later we brought them out onto the hill. So we gave them all the information beforehand, and then when we brought them out to walk on the hill, it started to make sense just to explain, well, this is what we were talking about. And the most important thing about that day was we were able to bring the farmers to see what their habitats should look like. Because one of the big problems is most people haven't seen habitats in good condition. Because what is good condition? Most, like if you can't show somebody, how can you expect them to manage it, to deliver that? So that was just in terms of our training. The next innovative thing we done was we engaged with our local National Parks and Wildlife Service. There's always been a very fractious relationship there. NPWS here on one side and farmers, and they don't meet in the middle. So this was in 2018. We went for a walk up across Cranamore Mountain. And I might say what we're doing up there in the snow, but it was actually, weather was fine and there was no snow down the road when we started that day. Just a reminder, it's hard to plan things in the uplands. Yesterday's weather, that was a different story. So it wasn't so much there about what we were going to see and look at plants and look at issues. It was more as to start conversations and start to build a relationship with the local NPWS staff. And what we found was we got, from my point of view, we had a great working relationship throughout the SUAS project. At the start of every year, we had a meeting during COVID. It was on Zoom, but we went through all the various sites we had in the National Park and the SAC areas, what actions we planned for it, and we discussed it out and we agreed to plan for the year ahead. And if there was any changes to that, I could just contact the local ranger, just if there was changes or some things to be clarified. And it worked really, really well. And I have to say, over the course of the SUAS project, that the wildlife rangers, two of them here today, Hugh and Anne, that they really, really got more and more engaged with us and more proactive as the scheme went along. And I think that's a very, very positive thing. One of the big pluses, I would say, from the SUAS project is we had a group of farmers who was looking at what we were doing with the SUAS project in terms of controlled burning and that, and they saw that we were working with NPWS, so they got up and went to talk to the National Parks and Wildlife Service to look for permission to carry out controlled burning. not only did they get permission to do it, but they also got support in terms of a fire break put in to help them doing it. So look, that's part of the relationship building, and that's a huge part of what has occurred in SUAS. If we can't engage with those people, the actions won't happen at all. We did encounter some large issues that we didn't have any answers for. That's Barnacullion out towards Mullicleavon, and there's a huge area of Barry Road and Peat. Now, we didn't know what to do about it, so we went and we asked the people who should know about it. So we had a walk up, again, it still rained that day, just remember here's the Uplands. So we had people, ecologists from MPWS, and we also had an ecologist and an inspector from the Department of Agriculture to come out. Now, we didn't get any great answers at the end of the day, but I think one of the things we need to do is for people high up in the Department of Agriculture, Department of Environment and MPWS, we need to decide and agree what do we actually want up in our hills, and to be upfront to say, well look, here's our hills, here's what we want up here, this is what we want you to deliver. So that hasn't happened. It's too easy just to say, oh yeah, we want our habitats in better condition, so we want them all in good condition. But unless you go and tell them what that is and show them what it is, you can't expect farmers to deliver it. So in terms of doing your habitat management plans, call them common plans, whatever, but you do need some sort of plan for how to manage these habitats going forward. So our approach to it was, first we had Faith come out and she looked at it, then we had discussions with the farmers. Now, these were actual discussions with the farmers, they had an input into the plans because there was no point in us putting things into a plan if the farmers weren't going to do it. So they were involved from the very, very start, and I think they really appreciated that. The other people for designated areas and that, we needed support from MPWS because for getting ARCs and permissions and whatever else, they had to be involved in the process. And where I fitted into this was as kind of a planner role, so I acted like a bit like a referee, or I suppose maybe that's being fair, more like a facilitator, that these people, that we could come to an agreement, because at the end of the day what we wanted was a simple plan with a list of actions. Year 1, 5 or 6 actions. Year 2, so a simple plan for farmers to follow, not something that's 20 pages long when you're flicking through. So very, very simple plan, and that was the role I played in that. Okay, so dealing with commonages, I suppose for anybody who don't know, commonage is an area with more than one person farming it. Now, when people think about commonages, or you mention commonages to people, this is the image that comes to most people, the Bull McCabe. No one can get home with these people, they're alone to themselves. But look, the reality is, these are ordinary people, they're just like anybody else. The only difference with these people is that they actually own a bit of commonage, or they're farming a bit of commonage. That's the only difference. So, we saw in the video there about forming these groups. I was involved in previous agri-environmental schemes, and what really hammered home to me was, as part of an EOS scheme at the time, I was doing plans for 2 farmers on the same road. They were both in the same commonage. One of them couldn't go into the scheme because they had enough sheep, and the other farmer couldn't go into the scheme because he had too many sheep. Now, between the 2 of them, the numbers were in around right, but I just thought, this has to be wrong, there has to be a better way, and we have to start looking at these sheep numbers and management on a whole hill basis, rather than dealing with them all as individuals. Also, back in 2012, I was part of a study group that went to the UK. We went to Scotland and north of England to see how commonages were being managed there. I was actually lucky enough to meet Julia, our next speaker, to see what way things were being done over there. And really, that confirmed to me that we need to be dealing with farmers as groups, not as individual farmers. So we came up with this concept of these commonage groups. Again, a simple name, call them what you like, but these farmers coming to work together. In doing it, we wanted them to work, so we spent a good bit of time. It wasn't just ticking a box some night, because if we don't spend the time putting them together, the first time they come across a big problem or an issue, the whole lot's going to fall down. So we did help them to develop a commonage group constitution. So basically what is that? Any group of people, if you want to operate and run much like GA clubs or whatever, or soccer clubs, you have to have a constitution. Basically, that's a set of rules. So if there's hard decisions to be made, or if somebody does something wrong or something, you need some sort of rules in place to be able to deal with that, rather than wait until something goes wrong and then everybody starts shouting at one another and the whole thing falls asunder. So we did form these constitutions. Now, we started from scratch. We didn't know what we were doing. I'll be up front. Myself and Bobby, we didn't know what we were letting ourselves in for. So we've done it over 3 phases, bringing the college. And I have to say, we have improved our process each time. We've made it much shorter and more concise. Part of the thing, or part of the reason for 2 reasons for ways that had improved. One was the farmers out there that had heard about these commonage groups before, they knew there was some of them in existence, so look, they weren't the worst thing in the world. So there's a little bit of confidence on their part. And second of all, myself and Bobby, we had more confidence in what we were doing, that we were able to let farmers off, let them have these discussions and work together. So, when we formed the groups, this is Granamore Commonage. This was taken, picture was taken after at an event back in 2019. We had an event out on their Commonage, and look at, you see all the smiling faces. This brought a sense of identity to these farmers. I met these farmers as a group back in 2015, I think it was. We were talking about these Commonage groups and stuff in the past, and somebody commented afterwards to me, it was the first time all those people had ever sat down in a room together. They might have been at a funeral together somewhere, but the first time they ever all came together to talk about their Commonage or anything else. So look at, there is a sense of pride in it also, that they have something up there that's valuable. It's not just people saying, down hill farmers are looking for money again. No, look at, they have these hills, there is something of value up there, and it does give them that element of pride. So what actually did the Commonage groups do? So they helped develop the management plans, and it wasn't just one farmer, it was all of them together. We sat down, we discussed it. If they thought something couldn't work or wouldn't happen, it didn't go into the plans. It had to be practical. They planned out the grazing. Now, I wouldn't say we ever got there fully with any of the hills in terms of the grazing management, because it's something that happens slowly over time. You can't just suddenly turn around and say, all right, we need 200 extra ewes in that hill next week or next year. Where did it come from? It takes time to change those sort of things. The group delivered the actions, okay? So whatever actions was agreed part of the plan, the group were responsible for delivering them. So they carried out the work, they organised among themselves who was going to do the work, and if it didn't happen, they were all kind of equally at fault for it not happening. For me, from the project point of view, it was great because all I had to do was contact either the chair or the secretary of the groups, and they contacted everybody else. The next one, I mentioned in the videos, just to give a bit of background to that. When we started the SUAS project, it was all based around actions and what we were going to support the farmers to do all these actions to improve the quality of the hills. But when we actually started in the first year, we suddenly realised, look, there's not that huge number of actions to carry out up there. There's not that huge amount of money to spend on actions to improve the habitats. The two most important things to get right up there is to stop this burning and to get the grazing right. And we weren't able to support that in our existing structure. So what we did was we introduced a habitat payment system. So we scored the habitats, and based on quality of that, we made a payment to the farmers. Okay. So when it came to the commonages, how were we going to divide out the money? And traditionally, on the commonages, all payments are based on what you declare in your BPS form or your Area 8 form, and that's it. So if you have a bigger share, you get whatever money. Now, it's the biggest gripe farmers will come back to me with, saying, look at, why should so-and-so down the road, they haven't been on the hill the last 20 years, they do nothing up there, so why should they get money out of this? And if we go out and we do something here and we improve the quality of the hill, so they're going to get money out as well, and they're doing nothing. So there was a big disquiet about that, and particularly those people, I say, that never go to the hills. So I threw it back to them and said, right, you come up with a better system. What way do you do it? What way do you want to do it? So they went all went off and they discussed it, and they came back with their various options. I will say we did give them a kind of a fallback that if they couldn't come to any better agreement, we would make the payment based on area, but none of them relied on that. They all came up with their own solutions. So look at, it is something that maybe we should be a little bit more inventive and think a little bit further as to how we do payments to farmers. I know it's very simple just to cross-check everything on computer with DPS applications and stuff like that, but just because something is easy to do doesn't make it right. That maybe we should be looking at the more complicated options if they're right for what's happening up on the hills. They supported each other, yeah, because look at when they went out to do something, they weren't on their own. They could bring someone down the road, and they went in groups to do work on that. Personal issues were left outside the door. When I was talking about these groups initially, people were saying, should the lads don't get on, you won't get them to agree, these groups will never work. The reality is actually the opposite, that when you have these groups, it actually makes it easy for people who don't get on to be involved. Because I was told afterwards for two of our groups that there was individuals in those groups that don't get on with one another, they don't speak to one another, and I didn't know about it. When it was pointed out to me afterwards, I kept an eye out and said, Jesus, them lads never walk out together or never walk in together. But when they came to those meetings, they were at the table and they were able to talk to the group, not to the other individual, and when they were making agreements and doing work and all, it was part of the group, not to the individuals. So it got over those issues. So rather than being a hindrance to the groups had to get over those issues. And the other point here, I suppose, is it kept each other on their toes. Look, it's great to say we have support and all here, but if we're making payments based on whole commonages, what one person does or doesn't do is going to affect everybody else on that commonage in terms of their payments or in terms of the quality of the commonage. So if somebody steps out of line, that affects everybody. And we did have an issue on one of our hills, on one of the commonages, where one individual did something they weren't supposed to do and caused damage. Now, we were faced with a problem at the time because, look, we're an agri-environmental scheme, we can't allow this damage to go ahead. So we had a couple of options. One was we could throw everybody out. Now, the people who on Commonage who did nothing wrong, which it wasn't fair on them to throw them out because they didn't do anything wrong, but it was the whole Commonage was an issue. The second option was pretend it never happened. Just ignore it, so nobody will ever know, and we'll go ahead. But we didn't. We met them head on, and we met them, I called them together, it was during COVID, so we had a big meeting outside in a big yard and brought everybody together. Everybody on the Commonage had their say. I spoke on behalf of the SUAS Project. So instead of people going around talking one conversation with you and a different conversation with somebody else down the road, everybody came, had their say. And what we did over time was, it took a number of meetings, it wasn't the easiest meetings ever, but we came to a resolution, and the individual involved, they paid out of their own pocket for remediation work on that, and the group is still going with it, going strong. So it is possible to do that. If we didn't have the group there, the whole thing was falling apart. I will say these groups do need support, especially in their initial formative years. As it's not something you can just form and walk away from them. You do need somebody there, facilitator or an advisor or something to come in and meet them. And the other thing is they need a purpose. There's no point in forming a group there and then they have nothing to do. For us, they were agreeing to how to carry out the actions. They were talking about their grazing and numbers of stock and that. So they had a purpose. If we don't have a purpose for them, they won't work, and they do need the element of sport early on in their years. Okay, just obviously I'm biased. I think the Commonage groups are the future, absolutely, for dealing with Commonages. We asked the farmers, you get a few comments from them in the video now in a minute, but this was at an event we had up in Lara there a few weeks ago, and I asked them straight out, and overwhelmingly came back to say yes, Commonage groups have a role in Commonage management and also in agri-environmental schemes. So the farmers involved are very, very open to it. Okay, so just in terms of habitat management, for any of you were up on the hill yesterday with us, it did come up there as well. Our uplands, they're not natural habitats. So what do I mean by that? I mean, they're only the way they are because of the way they've been managed. I'm not talking about managed for the last 10 or 20 years. For the last centuries, they've been managed in a certain way, and that's what has delivered these habitats. If we walk away and leave those, they're going to change, and we're going to lose our heathland habitats. So what is the number one management tool that we have that has created these habitats? And that is grazing. Sheep and cattle and horses. So if these are the animals and the management that has created these habitats in the first place, surely they have to be at the centre of any management of them going forward. So they do. Now, you might say, sure, cattle haven't been up there in years, but things happen slowly in the uplands. Like if you're looking at how quickly the peat grows, a millimetre per year. So we have some of the hills up there with maybe 2 metres of peat on them. That took 2,000 years to form. So things happen, it's a different time span up in the uplands. It's not like we're dealing with, we want to reseed a field and we go out now and we plough it and 6 weeks later we have stock in it. Things happen slowly in the uplands, and cattle would have been on our hills up until the mid-1800s, so it was only then the sheep numbers started to take over, and even up as late as the 60s and 70s there would have been a lot of cattle and horses would have been on a lot of our hills. It's only in more recent years they've disappeared. One thing we do need to remember when we're talking about grazing is these lads. We have a lot of these in Wicklow, nobody's quite sure how many we have, and they do contribute to grazing. Now, some people will say, but sure, if you have the deer up there, they're doing a grand job, so why do we need cattle or sheep at all? Should just let the deer do it? The problem with deer is they are selective grazers. They graze where they want and do what they like. We have no control over them whatsoever. So they graze out the nice areas, and much like the sheep, if we don't control them, they won't go into the tall vegetation at all. The other thing is that if we have sheep and cattle on the hills, we also have farmers to look after them. And if we want actions or work carried out, we have those farmers there. If we have the deer, they just go and do their own thing. We have no control. So just briefly about what happened. A lot of our hills, our grazing system is broken down. It's changed from what it used to be years ago. So now what we have is, like here we can see, as we go through the year, very, very few sheep in the early part of the year, big numbers in the summer, and again, very little at the end of the year. The 2 lines across the middle, they were the last min-max figures. I'm not saying they're right or anything else. I just put them in there to give you some sort of an idea as to what levels are actually up there. So big numbers here in the summer, which is that's not all right. Like sure, does not average out over the year. And unfortunately, up in the uplands, it doesn't, because when we have cattle here during these summer months, they'll eat the grassy areas. They'll eat the grassy areas, the vegetation, and they won't go into the tall, strong vegetation at all. If we want them to eat that type of vegetation, we need them here. This period here, January, February, after Christmas, when I suppose there's not much else for them to eat, but also after a couple of heavy frosts, the heather is more palatable, they will eat some. And also in April, May, early June period, when there's fresh growth coming that the deer will eat at this time of the year. And also that early summer period is when the stock will eat the Millennia grass. So as I say, our grazing system has broken down, and a lot of the hills, particularly when you're going to see if habitats are in poor condition, the sheep management or the grazing pattern has changed to something like this. Now, is it that the habitats have changed, there's less grazing, is that what has changed the sheep grazing up there? Or is it that the habitats have changed and the vegetation changed because of the sheep? I can't say which on individual hills, but the two of them are inextricably linked. You can't have one without the other. So the other thing about our hills is there's no fences up there. Now, we had these two areas in our project from the start, and when we looked at it, there was overgrazing on number 1 there was undergrazing on number 2, but when we sat down to look at the sheep numbers, what was happening up there, it didn't make sense to us. And the reason is, quite simply, sheep move. They don't stay where they're supposed to. And this hill here, number 2, they're moving out to the surrounding cottages, and hill number 1 here, they're actually moving in from surrounding areas. So if we look at these in isolation, we look at number 1 and say, oh, there's overgrazing on this hill, we reduce the sheep numbers. But you reduce the sheep numbers, it makes no difference because the sheep are still coming in from outside. On number 2, if you look at it and say, oh, too many sheep here, we'll pull them off of it. Well, what's the implications? Because actually the sheep on site number 2, they're doing a good job on site number 3. Because they're moving out there. If we take those sheep off, reduce the sheep on number 2, the same number of sheep are going to be grazing on the hill itself, but there'll be less of them travelling on to the next hill. So if we're looking at grazing, we have to look at big areas, large areas. You can't just look at one lip on its own. This is another issue. This is an area about approximately 250 hectares, and again, it's the one with the bare peat. Where is that? That's, if you look at this is an area between the Wicklow Gap Road and the Sally Gap Road. The road across the bottom here, and road across the top. There's roughly 10,500 hectares within that, open onto one another, no fences. There's actually no fences on the road to the north either, or to the south, so they can actually move way further than that. But within that 10,500, there's 36 different lip spots areas. Our damaged peat area, or eroding peat, comes out roughly across there someplace. That impacts directly on 8 different areas, lip spot areas, and all the others feed onto it. Now, when Faith got involved with us and we were looking at this hill in the blue here, Carrigaline, there was issues up here, and she was saying, right, we should fence off here at the bottom here. It's a nice narrow part, and that's how we solve it. Well, we looked at it, and first problem is the boundary of the common goes up across the middle of the ridge up here, so we could find it if we went up with a map or with a compass and that, but there's no boundaries here, so we'd have to fence the neighbouring commonage off as well. We didn't have permission for that. The other thing is, if we stop all the sheep coming here, sheep from all the other sides still keep coming in. So we can't look at these in isolation. We have to look at the whole landscape level. When we hear people talk about landscape level, this is the type of issues that we need to look at, and we have to involve everybody in it. Look at our basic management unit is still our lips plot. That's the commonage area or the individual farmer area. There are individual management units, and they're where we can talk to people. But when we're doing the big plans, we need to do them over the whole area, and everybody within that, then, as they come in, they contribute towards the overall plan. Okay, just another aside there, just in terms of cattle grazing. Cattle is reintroduced cattle into the uplands. It's one of the things we've been hearing a lot about the benefits of having cattle up there. So we went out and we tried to look at a number of farmers, and I think the farmers who have them are very, very happy with them, and even a lot of those outside looking in are quite content to have them up there. And we asked the farmers to look at. There was a very strong sense that yes, cattle can have a role up in the uplands. It doesn't mean that all the farmers are going to actually go and get cattle themselves, but they do think that they have a place up on the hills. So just in terms of grazing, because again I'm from a Teagasc background, so I see grazing as probably being the main thing to get right up there. I have it simplified down into one slide. And basically what I've come up with is I call it just the 4 R's of upland grazing. So first R is get the right type of stock. We have to have animals that will live up there, that will survive up there. Second thing is we need animals that's going to be able to provide the right type of grazing. And over here we need stock that's going to contribute to the farm income. They have to be part of our overall farm system. We're not just putting them up there to and forgetting about them. They do have to contribute. There's work involved and there's investment involved in them, and we should be getting a return on them. The second R is to get the right numbers of stock. Enough stock up there to graze the vegetation that's up there, but we don't want too much that we're causing overgrazing. And we don't want too many up there that we're actually having to go up and feed them with round feeders, supplementary feeding. Because once we put in the round feeders up there, all the benefits that the stock does up on the hill, whether it be cattle or sheep. They stop grazing, so they stop eating vegetation, they stop moving around, so they stop doing any of the management stuff we want up there, and what you get is a congregation of animals and nutrients around those round feeders. So round feeders is a big no-no. If we do need some supplementary feeding, if you can do it with concentrates, where you can go out and you can move the areas you're feeding them, you spread the damage and you can still keep the animals moving around. The other thing is, I suppose, and it comes up the next one, most of our hills, the problem with the numbers is we've too many in there at the end of the summer and not enough for the rest of the year. So that's the next hour, I suppose, the right time of the year. When are the sheep actually up on the hill? But in early summer and late winter, that's when they eat the heather and the coarser vegetation. In late summer, we need them there to eat grassy vegetation. So it's important to have the right numbers throughout the year. There's no point in putting big numbers in the summer unless we get them up at the other time of the year. Also, in terms of millennia, if we have stock up there in the early part of the summer, they will eat millennia. And actually, on some of our cut areas where we did the cutting, when we went back out to assess them there this year, there was quite a lot of browsing, even from the sheep, on the millennia that was growing there. The fourth hour then is the right areas of the hill, because we have an issue here, and it's probably occurring in other parts of the country as well, that we have both undergrazing and overgrazing on the same hills, and they can actually be very, very close together. So just putting the right number of sheep out on the hill is not going to solve our problems. We have to get them into the right areas of the hills, so we do. And that involves encouraging them into the rougher areas to try and reduce the amount of grazing on the other parts of the hill that are overgrazed. And also, if we carry out any actions, any improvement works of that, we tend to get a lot of overgrazing in those areas afterwards. So that's 4 hours, the right type of stock, the right number, the right time of the year, and the right areas of the hill. So how do we know what's happening up there? We hadn't a clue. If you look back through, I know there's part of agriculture staff here, but if we look back through farmer records that have been filled up for previous schemes, farmer come into you at the end of the year, okay, what stock do you have on the hill? The first thing he'll ask is, what was it supposed to have? And 9 times out of 10, that's what goes in on the form to keep everybody happy. Okay, so we want to know what was actually happening on it. The thing is, most of our farmers around here, they have good lowland as well as the upland. So just because they have a certain number of sheep doesn't mean they put them to the hill, because they could be carrying them on the lowland. So we started in the first years and we started to record what was happening. The first couple of years we used it by paper, and then we introduced an app that we were able to get the farmers to record the numbers on the app, and that we would know. So as a starting point, if we know what's happening up there with the sheep, how many sheep's up there and when they are, then we look at what are the issues on the hill. Is it overgrazing, undergrazing, or whatever? We can see how we can change our grazing activity to address those issues. Because somebody sitting down with a map in an office someplace to come up with a magical number of sheep for the hill, it's just completely unrealistic. So we were looking at conditions of the hill, what were the issues, and then we recorded to see what was happening. And then we get the farmers to move in the right direction in terms of grazing. How do we support our farmers in the grazing of these hills? We introduced cattle. I suppose first thing the lads were getting cattle asked were, what type of cattle should they get? And the only advice I would give them, get something that won't die up there. Okay, it was up to them what breed, because I'm not promoting anyone. And it might sound very simple, but look that is a priority. You want something that's going to live up there. So some of them got Dexters. One farmer got Dexters, a couple of them got Galloways, and actually more recently now we have a couple of other normal, more continental breeds cattle out on the hills at various times of the year. They're not up there at full length, but it's up to the farmers, and it's not about picking a breed rank. As I say, you could get Angus and they could be bigger than Charlies, you know, so the right type of stock. We did use like a bell here hanging around the neck. That was a GPS collar, because when we put cattle out on the open hills, there's no fences up there, and we didn't want to go up and put permanent fences because it's too hard and too difficult, and nobody wants fences up there. We can't use temporary electric fencing up there either, because we haul the deer up there, they'll rip it down fairly fast, so you won't be able to keep them on it. So to make it practical, because look, it's great to come up with these ideas, but if a farmer can't practically do this, it's not going to happen. So we tried out the use of these GPS collars so that the farmers can find them within areas. They can keep track on them to know where they are on the hills, and they've been a really, really success. They do come at a cost, but look, if we want farmers with cattle up there, we have to make it possible for them. In terms of sheep and that, this was a farmer who had a good flock of lowland sheep, and he was quite happy getting good crops of lambs out of them and that, but when we told him he has to have them up on the hill for longer, his sheep weren't suitable. So he bit the bullet and he went off and he bought a go of lambs, brought them home, and got them settled out on the hill and with a new proper hill flock. Now he has a flock of sheep that grazes the hill, and he has a better flock of sheep down in the lowland that's going to give him a better crop of lambs and bigger lambs to sell. In terms of horses, we're lucky with one of our sites that we have horses. Horses do a great job. We haven't promoted horses grazing on the hills very much, and the reason is we have a bad history of horses on the hills here, and where horses have come in the past, you can't get rid of them. And there could be 10 horses there today, and tomorrow next side it could be a load more. So we're just very, very conscious about promoting that too widely. But on this site, one of the farmers involved had these horses himself. Just the two boys here on the bottom. We do need to help farmers in terms of breeding. Help them where they're going to source these stock. Not everybody can go off down the country to buy a flock of sheep to come up and put on the hill. If you're going to breed your own, where do you get the rams? One of the issues with people, or with farmers, when you reduce the amount of time that the sheep spend on the hills, so you start putting them up there for a less period of time, they're longer down in the lowlands, so suddenly the sheep start getting bigger. Why? Because you want more lambs out and you want better better quality lambs to sell. So the sheep suddenly start getting bigger and softer, less suitable for the hills. And if we want to go back to the hills, most of the farmers, they can't just turn around and put their sheep up to the hills. What will happen is you let them out, they go up, they stand outside the gate and roar at you till you open the gate and let them back out. So we do have to change their breeding, and that's something probably for advisory services and whatever, to work with the farmers in terms of explaining to them what type of sheep they need. And I'm not talking about breeds because I get it here if I talk about individual breeds, but it's about the type of sheep rather than breeds. We did try some innovative things using feed buckets and that here. Why? We wanted to encourage more sheep out on the hills over the winter, so this was an easy way to get farmers to encourage them to keep them out, because we were getting feeding from us to do it. And also it allowed us that we could put these feed buckets into the areas of taller header, so we had a chance to dictate where the sheep were grazing, so we could move them into these taller header areas during the winter. The bottom right here we can see our cattle here with the collars, and because the cattle had the collars on them, we were able to move the cattle into an area, Millennia, up on Pat Dunn's farm, to get them to graze out at the right time of the year. So look, these are all innovations. I'm not going to spend any more talking about that, but just one thing missing from here, and it's a very, very important ingredient: we need advisors. And we need advisors that know what they're talking about. And this is not people who are sitting down drawing up plans with farmers and submitting plans for acres or whatever else. This is advisors who can tell farmers what to do. And it starts with the stock, managing the stock. We have advisors going around telling farmers how to manage their lowlands in terms of grassland and all the rest. We need more advisors with more knowledge and more experience in managing the uplands. The other thing is, we're asking farmers to manage these hills for vegetation. If you want to make more money out of hill sheep, usually the simplest way to do that is you keep the ewes off the hills. But we are asking farmers to put them up. So farmers may be suffering in terms of animal production and that, but what we're offering at the other side of that is we're introducing habitat payments. So farmers are going to be rewarded for having habitats in better condition. So if we're asking farmers to go up there with the stock, to graze it, to deliver this, but suddenly that becomes a product. The habitat the farmers have on the hills, that's one of their products from sheep. So instead of just having lambs to sell, because we won't mention wool because it doesn't cover the cost of shearing, but instead of just the lambs being the only product from the sheep, suddenly the habitat quality, that's a product. And that works as long as we reward them for delivering that. If we start lax on our rules and people get away with it and to get paid regardless, well, then it's a waste of time. But if we're paying them for delivering it, farmers will do it. And we have to be careful how we put the money into the system. Okay, burning. When SUAS was coming around, the big issue among everybody was burning. Dates were wrong for burning, we can't do it, this, that and the other. So look at, here's what we are normally used to seeing after fires: big areas burnt. Regardless of what time of the year, we're getting very hot fires, a lot of damage caused. That's one that happened there last March. There was 160 hectares in one fire went up across. There was. What difference does it make? I know some of you probably think that Faith Asher, she's an ecologist, so we don't really care much about what she says or that. But look, if you're looking at it from a farming point of view, what's happening up there? You are getting erosion. You can see the cracks in the peat here where start of erosion. Once that starts to erode away, there's no grazing in that. The other big thing is the vegetation that's coming back afterwards is stuff that the sheep won't eat. After the fires, the sheep come in and they graze all the vegetation that they like, and they leave the stuff that they don't like. So over time, if you keep doing this repeatedly, the things that the sheep don't eat, the Millennia grass, the bracken, the mat grass, deer grass, those are things going to gradually start taking over because there's no grazing on them and everything else is being grazed out of it. The biggest issue with these fires is we're not just talking about one fire. We're not just talking about fire happened up there last year or the year before. The problem is we have a legacy of fires. The damage is cumulative, and where it gets really, really serious is if we have a fire on a hill where that hill hasn't recovered since the last fire. So if we had a fire there 4 or 5 years ago, it's only starting to recover now, and we get another fire on it, the damage is way, way worse. If we could leave it for 20, 30 years, let the hill recover, we have the various different moss layers and whatever else in and the vegetation, there will be less damage, but we're getting these fires too often. Why is there more fires on the hills? First reason is there's less grazing on it, so the vegetation is getting out of hand, so farmers going up there to burn it Number one, they'll say, sure, we have to look after our payments, we don't want the ground to be ineligible. And the other thing that they're burning for is they want fresh vegetation coming up, young vegetation, so that when they put their sheep up there at the end of the summer, they're going to graze it out of it. Now, part of the problem is we're trying to make the hills fit into our lowland sheep systems. We want to only put the ewes up there in the end of the summer. We wean the lambs, throw the ewes out there for a while, and hopefully they'll thrive really well in this fresh growth and bring them off of it. So we're trying to make that fit into our lowland systems, which doesn't work. We need to look at the uplands. We need to work with the uplands rather than trying to bend them to our will. So, controlled burning, look, we went and done it. Everyone was saying, actually, you can't do the burning within the dates and all the rest, but we did it. We went and we got all our permissions. We were actually lucky enough that the MPWS allowed us to do burning in the National Park even. We tried to do training, where we had that walk yesterday where people burned or parked their cars yesterday. We had a training event up there back in 2016 as part of that burning conference. It snowed and it rained so heavy that day that we had a few bales of straws back up and we couldn't even get those to burn. We got, it was Kieran Nugent from the Forest Service doing the training. We got him back up again this year, and we left it, or sorry, 2019 when we were doing the burning, we left it as flexible as possible to the last possible minute, and we said, right, grand, we'll go. We went up there, weather was dry, everything was going in our favour until we got out on the hill and it was just too windy. So virtually impossible to organise. I will say, you cannot talk to people about burning. If you want people to train them how to do it, you have to bring them out there. They have to see the flames. They have to be walking along to see the smoke, because otherwise you have no appreciation for it. In practice, what happened here was I went out with all the sites for their first day of burning, and I would have provided their training. I was part of I got fire training in Spain a couple of years ago as part of a different project. So I went out with them. But you can't sit down in a room and tell people how to do it. Some people were telling me, why didn't you put together a video to explain all of this out? And I just said, absolutely no way. Look, that's ridiculous. Like, you shouldn't be trying to simplify this. It's a very, very complicated thing, and you need to know what you're doing. We had large areas of tall heather that we wanted to try and break up. So how do we stop the fire in tall heather? If we've tall heather, how do you stop it spreading? So we were anxious also, because it was the first time doing it. We didn't want the fires to get away, because if the first fire got away on us, we'd never be allowed to do it again with the project. So we were cautious, and we got a tractor in to cut areas around it. Now, I'm not talking about cutting fire breaks that the fire just burn over there and go out. These were places that would allow us to light the fire and control the fire, and that's all they were. Some of the areas were too rough for to get tractors and stuff onto, and we got in brush cutters. And again, that was to give us a chance to control these fires. Here's on one of the sites there where we were up there yesterday. It's over to the side of it. You see where we created these areas for burning. We did our all preparation. We did get the burning done. Okay. First thing is, it is very difficult to organise, because with weather and everything else, who's going to go up there and do the burning? They're probably working, trying to get time off of jobs and all the rest. It's very difficult, and you probably don't know until that morning if it's going to work or not. So it's difficult to organise in advance. You do need quite a lot of people. We were working off the basis of having 6 people. One person going along lighting the fire, and at least 2 people either side of the fire to keep an eye on it, the flanks of the fire, and one person to stand back a bit just to see what was going on, because when you're up there close to the fire, the smoke is blowing around, and so you can't see further than the table away from you there. So to have that extra person there to stand back and look at it is very, very important. So the other thing in terms of what came back after the fires, it's very variable. We went up, first of all, to look at what had grown back. We're surprised there was not only heather, there was no mosses or anything else, but actually when we went to look at what we started out with, there was none there to begin with. So how do we expect them to come back? Any of the areas that we had real tall heather, leggy heather, we got damage done to the soil. Because no matter what way we burned it, the fires burned very hot, there's a lot of fuel there, and there is damage. On some of the sites we done in September, the fires, the vegetation was a bit greener than that, and it didn't burn near as well. Now, on one of the hills, I have to say, we spent the day going around lighting the fires, and the biggest job I had that day was to get the lads off the hill, because when we were coming off of it, any place they see a little patch not burnt, we're going over there to burn it, and to burn it, we have to get it. And again, it's that lowland mentality. We're thinking we're mowing a field of thistles, we have to get every single one of them. But when Faith came out to look at those sites with me, they were much more acceptable from an ecological point of view. Why? Because there was small bits of burning, there was small little bits of damage, which were very, very confined, and overall the fires didn't get near as hot, so there was much, much less damage. One thing I will say about that, if we're going for these cooler fires at that time of the year, we're going to have an awful lot more smoke. So somebody has to sit down and think, well, what's the issue with the smoke and the toxins from these smokes and stuff, or in the smoke and that, but that's a whole other issue. Controlled burning is not just about lighting the fire. A lot of people had this concept in their heads. we're going to burn the hill, we wait till the wind is blowing in the right direction, we tip up across there, we light it, and the forecast is giving rain or heavy dew coming in across the evening, that's going to put it out. That's not what controlled burning is about. We have also, because for the last 20 years we've been arguing so much about the burning dates and when you're allowed to burn and when you're not allowed to burn, we have this general belief now that any burning that takes place between the 1st of September and the end of February, that's within the legal period, that's controlled burning, that's grand. Anything that takes place out of that is illegal. But the reality is, burning before the end of February, it's within the legal burning dates, but that doesn't make it controlled burning. What does controlled burning involve? It involves first identifying appropriate areas for to carry out that burning. Where should it be done? How do you control it? And also, what is the follow-up management afterwards? There's no point going out and burning in an area and then next week, or sorry, a couple of years' time, wait for it to grow back and it's fit to be burned again. If we look at gorse here, what happens if we burn this area of gorse? Well, the flames, it's going to burn off the vegetation off the top. If we kill that off, that's okay. But what's going to grow back? The fire will head to germinate the gorse seeds and kills everything else. So if we have gorse and we burn it, we get even more gorse back. So do we have any alternatives to it? What say if we do nothing at all, what will happen? Gorse has a life cycle, it will eventually go towards woodland. It grows up, it opens out. That's on the side of the Sugarloaf, just up here behind us. Now, I showed this slide at a wildfire conference last week, and I could see the foresters and the fire stars looked at me and said, geez, there's a wildfire, that's a problem waiting to happen. But it only is if we have somebody going up to like that. So if we are going to get farmers, we need to be upfront about it and say, look, this is acceptable, this is what we want on our hills, and we will reward you for not burning that. So you take away that pressure on them to burn. Some of the other actions we done here was we did control cutting with manually, both with tractors and with individuals with brush cutters. Just run through this slide, it's an important one. This is a site that came in to us back in 2016. You can see here the little cut areas where we were preparing for controlled burning. It didn't happen. But what were the issues on that? Areas in red there, they were areas that were very tall, leggy heather. The blue areas are areas of overgrazing. And also we had issues with bracken here. So when they came into the project, there was some cutting done here before we started. So once we got involved, we put in our fire breaks. We created these patches that we were doing controlled burning. Didn't get a lot done in 2020. So what we did then was, since then we put in a series of controlled burning and cutting. Now we divided the areas out. Why did we divide them out in this sort of pattern here? Why not just start at the corner here, work our way up? But basically, what we wanted to do is we wanted to control the vegetation over the whole area, reduce the amount of vegetation, so that as it starts to come back, it'll give structure into that habitat over here. Also, if we do it in patches like this, we encourage the sheep back into those areas. We don't just put them all out to surrounding areas. From a fire point of view, what have we done here? We have reduced the amount of fuel in that, so if the fires come, they're not going to be as hot. But also, we have reduced the incentive for farmers to burn those areas. Why? Because they're getting the grazing back in here, and because it's being managed, it's going to be more acceptable from an eligibility point of view. We don't have to worry about it. Just other issues that we tackled, again, was just in terms of bracken. We looked at it through spraying and through bracken bruising and that. Very, very difficult, and our chemicals that we're using for spraying are going off the market. So again, what's the option if we do nothing, if we leave it? What will happen over time is we will get it start to revert back to woodland. I'm not saying this is the answer for all our hills that we close the gate and walk away, but in some of those very, very difficult areas, maybe this is an option we should be looking towards. It is not rewilding, it is managing different parts of the hills, so there's different solutions for different parts of the hills. Other actions that we carried out, just we did some tree planting for water quality, gully planting. We were cutting thick spruce, removing them. We helped farmers with some road repairs and that. We did some rhododendron control. Just one point in terms of anything to do with repairing roadways or paths, you have to be careful, because if you do repairs on them, you're going to increase the amount of use. And what we have found is if you improve an area at the bottom, you cause additional problems further up the hills. Other actions that we did here were we did some drain blocking. This was some willow spilling. That's kind of a wattle wall on the side of a drain. We did some drain blocking here, and we did got involved with a restoration project with MPWS. You can see here again, back to the weather, there was sleet up there. One thing about it was very, very cold, and there was nobody standing around. So everybody came up with it that day, they worked hard. So what were we doing here? Look, we put in a trial area to see what can be done. I'm not saying we have the answers, but we needed to make a start. We looked at what was being done in the UK with Moors for the Future, and we put in these 3 little trial areas. One area here with just brash, bunched up heather. One area here we added grass seeds to it as well because that's what they're doing over there. And one area here, because I'm coming from an agriculture background, said what happens if we just put the grass in it, will it come or what will happen? So that was one part, and we fenced off a couple of enclosures. Just in terms of doing these actions, in terms of dam block and doing the header restoration work and that, I have to admit that's something that I was pushing with the farmers. It's not something that farmers are generally used to in terms of part of their normal farming practices. Is it or should it be part of the agri-environmental schemes going forward? I'm not sure. If it is, we're going to have to create big incentives to get farmers to do that type of work as part of their agri-environmental schemes. If farmers are not interested in doing it, maybe we do have to look at other issues, and maybe it is something that we should be looking towards different projects to do this large-scale restoration work. But it's something we need to discuss and think about. Don't just automatically assume because there's money in a farmer's going to go up and do it. I'll finish there. Thanks very much.
The community groups, I think, are very, very important. Very important because I suppose historically on the hills, you would have a situation where there was usually one person who took the lead. Sometimes that fellow, of course, was a bully.
There's always bits of rows on them, and there's the odd bull McCabe on some of them, and things like that. So
everyone has their say, and then they can meet up and they can decide what they're doing, and they're all working together, working in unison, rather than one lad going out and doing his own thing and somebody else not pulling his weight, and all that type of thing.
At the start, we weren't too sure what it was going to involve. It was the first time we'd been working as a group or involved in a group in terms of farming and on the commonage anyway. So we didn't really know what to expect at the start.
well, there's no harm. There's never any harm in talking and discussing things and getting the views of the other people that's on it and you get everybody happy, get everybody on the one hymn sheet, as they say, you know.
We met and formed a group formally with chairman, secretary, etc., under the auspices of SUAS and Declan, and that has led to a sort of a common interest in the hill that wasn't there before. Like before that, the people who had the shares up there, they never really mentioned the commonage or what should be done with it or what shouldn't be done with it.
For one reason, it was good in the commonage areas where it got farmers to actually interact with one another, where maybe they weren't before.
It needed that formal push from behind to set up that grazing management committee, we'll call it, on the mountain. And then there was the incentive of money, of course, which always helps, you know, always helps.
Well, we got a good chance to talk about it, like, you know, and everyone kind of put their point across, like, you know, there was different ways you could divide up the money. Was it, you know, the money was there, did you take a lump sum or did you just keep track of your hours? So everyone kind of had an app and you put in on your phone what hours you done on the hill.
For many years we all would have been out here individually working, and you'd be passing each other, or you'd say hello, you'd have a chat, you'd see each other out on the commonage. But you know, it brought us to working more with each other and working alongside each other.
But one of the things I found about the groups was there's an element of peer pressure in it. Now, that's a positive thing because the actions that any one individual does or doesn't do has implications for everybody else on the commonage. And obviously, their farmers would be more worried about their neighbours have to be in the road than they are about Department of Agriculture or somebody remote like that. So that's a very positive thing.
We got a lot done, but we should have got a lot more done, really. There's 400 trees planted there now, and it wouldn't be our first priority, but to go along with the idea and that we done what we needed to do, and we did done some spraying, and I've done a great job on it. It was a pity we didn't get more of it done.
I suppose one of the first things we done was we improved the track, an access track onto the hill. There was always a rough track. We improved that, made it much easier for getting our stock in and out off the hill. We done some bracken bruising. We planted over 300 trees in the gully.
You can see up here, there was patches of heather cut to encourage the sheep into it, to get them moved on into different areas and encourage the grazing, and it's moving the sheep further out onto the hill and into areas that were never grazed in the last, I don't know, in my lifetime. The farmers were more involved. We weren't being told what to do. Like we were asked what we'd like to do, and if it was okay with the Parks and Wildlife, then there was never a problem. Any cutting we did, it was a minimum, and we only did a couple of controlled burns. Were very, very small now, but then the likes of it, they did make a difference, but we didn't go mad.
The group structure that we have set up, because it's a simple structure and the process we have for forming it, I think these groups can be used for any group of farmers, not even just for commonages. All you need is a group of farmers who have a common objective or goal, and where if they work as a collective together, they can be more effective. Because it's a simple structure that they can be modified to suit any group of farmers.
Thank you very much, Declan. There's an awful lot there. We have a roaming mic. Does anyone want to ask a question of Declan or make a comment? Yes, Michael.
Hi, just in relation to cattle grazing on the hill, TB is a big problem in Wicklow, and I'm sure you've had plenty of experiences with it over the years. One of the things that I often wondered is why we couldn't vaccinate cattle that are being used in these situations, and has there been any thought or any conversations had with the department about this?
Not to date. We were trying to reintroduce cattle to get farmers accustomed to the idea of having these cattle up in the hills. If we can have the cattle up there, if we can demonstrate, these are providing a service up there by going around grazing it. To date, we haven't had any issues with TB in any of our herds on the hills and that, but if we can demonstrate the benefit of having the cattle up there, if there is issues with TB, I know it's a big problem in Wicklow, well then we have a very strong case to go to the department with, if we want these animals up here, can we enter into a vaccination programs with them? The biggest issue with them is if you have animals that you're going to start vaccinating, you have to keep them away from the rest of the population of cattle, and they won't be going into the food chain. But if we can prove the benefit to having them up there, that's a conversation we can have further down the line. But it's the biggest concern most farmers have about cattle in the areas.
Thank you, Declan and everybody. Just one of the things that good lot talked about burning there, and I'm on the Dublin side of the hills, a few of us are, and it's not always farmers to do the burning. Like we have a fair bit of anti-social activity, which sometimes results in large areas getting burned, and the national parks would be aware of it as well. So it's something that we have to. We work with the parks, and we work with everybody to try and control it or stop it, and it's illegal dumping and different things like that, but it's something that we actually can't control except to try and do the best we can to stop it when it starts. Thank you.
Just on that, yes, there is some fires, and particularly up where you are, you're just outside of Dublin and that, but it's quite easy to tell apart the fires which are lit by farmers and those who are lit by others. Generally, if somebody's going out lighting fires with a crack or whatever, they're not going to take the time to walk up across the hill to get up. They're not going to wait until the day when the wind is blowing in the right direction to get away. Up your area, there is that element. It's a different problem we have to solve, and maybe up there, I say, if it's not farmers lighting it, you may have to look at different solutions, which would maybe involve creating fire breaks around the areas where these fires naturally light. The same goes for recreational users, and the other thing is vigilance up there, that if these fires do start, that you can get at them very quickly. But no, I do accept up there is a problem, but I'm just talking about the fires that farmers are lighting to control vegetation.
Comments or questions? Yes, at the back there.
Thanks. Rebecca Allen from NI Water. Thanks, Declan. Just listening to your thing there about the challenges you have with grazing areas that are high up and don't have any delineation and then you've got problems with over and under grazing. Did you find that your farmers are obviously living on the land and close to the land? Did you find then the farmers were doing all the work to move those animals around themselves? Did you have any extra rangers to help them out with that? And then you were talking about the GPS collars on the cattle. Did the farmers use that with the apps and stuff a fair bit, or was it more like a sort of manual moving stuff around?
Okay, One of the things we looked at from the start of the SUAS was we called it shepherding, because farmers were identifying for us why did not put sheep up to the hills, and some of them saying we're too old, we haven't time, we're working. So we came up with this idea that, look, we'll pay one person to go up to the hill to look after the sheep, keep an eye on the sheep and move them around for everybody else. It didn't really work because everybody wanted to look after their own stock. They weren't happy to let somebody else after them, somebody else going up with the dog and moving my sheep and that. So they all want to look after their own sheep. Sheep tend to be settled in certain parts of the hills, and it is hard to change that. We had one individual who introduced a new flock, and he had a big job trying to get him settled on that. And his biggest problem was when he put the sheep out, there was no other sheep on the hills. Because generally they say the best fence for a sheep is another sheep. So if they start moving out, if they're meeting the sheep from the neighbouring hill, that'll stop them. So where there's no sheep on the hills, surrounding hills, it's virtually impossible to stop them from roving around. And if we can look at it from both sides, that look at if we want to confine sheep in these areas, one thing we can do is we can provide incentives to keep them in it, in terms of improved vegetation through cutting or controlled burning, and we were using feed buckets and that. But going up constantly, hunting the sheep around, it didn't work for us. In terms of the cattle collars, they were being used to exclude animals from areas and also to confine them in the areas. I think Pat used them there to control the millennia, and that was through the app on the phone, you just moved them around.